Good evening. Welcome to the Economic Development Committee for October 16th, 2018. I think to start off here, we're going to approve the minutes from, what was the date of our last one? September 18th, 2018.
Need a motion?
Yeah, if I can have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of September 18th, 2018 as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passed. All right, great. So the first item tonight on the agenda, we have Dan Coughlin. He is going to do a presentation on the downtown wastewater treatment feasibility study. So if you want to come up, Dan.
Sure.
And,
Thank you.
welcome tonight, and thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
I'll
give you the floor.
go through these as quickly as I can. Just to give you a brief overview as far as what we've been doing over the past several months. Obviously, what we did is first we looked at the individual parcels that you had. We had a primary area, which was the town center. And there was also an expanded area, which we added to the scope, which was basically a little bit more than just the town center, encompassing that. But for the most part, you can see on your handouts, these are basically the two areas that we were looking at.
Okay.
We looked at all of the parcels within that district and looked at some of the Board of Health records as well as the parcel data. We did some inspections on some of the parcels as well to try to make sure we had, or we were able to see what the current uses are. What we did then is basically generate some flows using Title V, which is the state sanitary code, the standard criteria for allocation of flows or generation of wastewater flows. A lot of it's based upon uses, about bedroom counts, about floor space, about number of seats, all different criteria depending on the use of the facility. Board of Health records were a little sparse on some of these properties. Didn't have a lot of information from the Board of Health on them. Probably I'd say about 30% of the septic systems in the downtown area had valid information that we could actually utilize for flow estimation purposes.
Really?
A lot of them are fairly old. We're talking basically as early as the 60s, 70s, 80s. Some of them had upgrades. But you can see how the systems are fairly restrictive based upon the lot sizes, where the septics are in the rears of many of these properties. And there's really not too much area for leaching. So a lot of these facilities have been upgraded over the years if they had a problem on a marginal base or as best feasible. And that helps relative to not creating a public health issue, but in terms of giving them capacity for additional growth or change of use. That's really not there in the downtown area, as you probably know.
And for that 70%, so they wouldn't be subject to Title V unless they sold the property, is that?
That's correct.
That's right, okay.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's
I mean,
actually pretty good that there's people been sticking around town for a while, I
yeah,
guess.
I mean, you can have a very old system and it can still pass Title V to some
Oh, okay.
degree
Gotcha.
without being effective. It's just, the people are could be conserving water use.
Gotcha.
And we did look at the water use records in that area, and I'd say that's pretty accurate. People are conserving water, so they
Okay.
don't have problems with their septic systems.
Gotcha.
Out of the entire area, we estimated that if we were using standard Title V methods, we'd probably have about 60,000 gallons of max day capacity for the downtown area, and that includes both the primary and secondary service areas. And the actual water consumption is more in the range of about 13,000 gallons on an average day base. Now, if we can look at that on a peak or max day base. A lot of times, design criteria for the state will say, take current water consumption, multiply it by 2, and that's kind of a max day average. That only brings us to about 26,000. So it's a big difference between you know, the current water use and what standard criteria are for Title V. What I would say is a better number and a number that is more conducive to sewer design would be a factor of 3 to apply to the current water consumption. And in that case, you're talking somewhere around 39,000. And that might be a more accurate max day number.
39.
That should be existing currently for this system.
What is the existing now, 13?
It's about 13,000 gallons per day on an average. That's an
Yeah.
annual average,
Yeah, well,
you know? So you gotta look at it in terms of a max day, peak month, you know, so obviously it goes up. When you do it over an annual average, and that's based on 4 quarters of water data, you know what I mean? It gets kind of flattened out. So, I mean, from my perspective, a max day, a real max day for that area would be closer to 39,000. But on Title V values, we're projecting as much as 60,000 gallons per day.
If I could, Dan, how far back did you go? Because I don't know if you're aware, but there have been a lot of spots there that have been vacant for quite some time. So
Yeah,
did you factor
and
that
for
in?
those properties, we did look at when they were using water.
Okay.
And just applied that value for when they were vacant,
I see, okay,
just so it wouldn't be lopsided.
right.
But for the most part, there were some that had unusual water use. It could have been a leaky toilet or something like that, but we don't know that, so we just used the number.
I
You know,
get you,
they had a
okay.
peak month that was very high. But, you know, that was the first step is really to key in how much flow you're gonna deal with, and how much flow you have to deal with in terms of design.
Okay.
There are other criteria that, you know, when you're designing the sewer collection system, you use as well, a little bit different from Title V. And those criteria can also use Title V numbers, but then use different peaking factors to account for certain things. So what we ended up doing is, you know, balancing all the different alternatives. Our design number for the current facilities was 60,000 gallons per day. And what we did is we added 15% to that, or we rounded up to 70,000 gallons per day for basically changes in use within the district. So if someone wanted to convert, you know, the second floor to residential apartments, or to put in a restaurant, or to do something else that would be more water intensive, essentially it's accounted for in that extra number. So our 2 numbers that we have for the primary service area is around 31,000 gallons per day, and for the entire area is around 70,000 gallons per day.
So the 30 is the primary study, if we're looking at the map?
Yeah, it's a little over 30,000 gallons.
Okay.
And I presented that on page 3. You can see some of the flow numbers and what we're using for design
Okay.
purposes. We also looked at the population. The population's been fairly steady over the last several years. Its growth is about 0.88% per year. Obviously, if you have a more vital downtown area, you might get a little bump in growth from that. You know, as much as maybe 1% instead of the 0.88. But what we've done is basically projected that out so that we have some values for how much increase in traffic and increase in use of the downtown center we would have. The handout basically lists a lot of different subjective items that we used in the evaluation, looking at different conditions within the service area. I won't really get into too much from that respect.
Can I just stop you for
Sure.
one second there? In terms of the population,
Yes.
I think that we're capped at for the town. I think the estimate is around
up.
like 12,000. Is that?
Yeah,
does
it's
that ring a
around, it
bell?
was around 11 the last time I.
Around 11?
Yeah.
Can you give an estimate to say if the town had reached the capacity of the population
Build
is
up.
what we, you know, as
Yep.
opposed to just the 1% over time? Or per year, I guess?
Yeah, well, I believe you're looking at a build-out number.
Okay,
Right, yeah, that's what
yeah.
that was, yeah.
But the build-out isn't necessary in our planning period.
Oh,
So
I
the
see.
build-out could be in 50 years, could be in 60 years. I don't remember seeing anything that said the 11, 12,000 was within the 20-year period,
okay.
you know? So in terms of doing that projection, what we're really trying to look at is basically a 20-year period
Gotcha,
in
okay.
here. 10 is our primary focus, you know, because that's over the course of when things would get converted theoretically. You know, when the construction would be done, when it'd be hooked up, and then where are you, you know?
Gotcha,
But,
okay.
you know, the build-up population is typically, you know, 50, 60 years
Further
into the
on.
future.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, all right, I follow it, thank you.
Yeah, anytime you have questions, you know,
I'm just trying to
please.
sit there, when you said we're gonna go, it was growing at that, they aren't all gonna move into that little space down there, are they?
No, that's not for the downtown.
Yeah, okay, I follow you now, I got you.
You know, but one aspect to mention is if you do start getting some mixed uses in the downtown area, you could get a bump in the growth rate, you know, because obviously that tends to get realized a lot quicker than you would for single-family developments or subdivisions,
Okay.
you know? So you could have a little blip in there
Gotcha.
relative to mixed use, if mixed use is really promoted in the downtown.
And are we just basing these estimates today on single story as it exists today, or as
Well,
you
the
mentioned, if we
15%, yeah, the
did do mixed
15%
use?
on top that we had was basically if, you know, mixed-use development. And that could
Okay.
mean adding a second floor for residential
I
units.
get you. Okay.
Okay? The parcels don't change. You're not gonna create new parcels or bring more parcels in. But
Right.
you could have a change of use of those existing parcels.
I get you. Okay. That makes
Okay?
sense.
So I think the 60,000 that we projected using, you know, Title V numbers is conservative in itself.
Okay.
And then the 15% on top of that pretty much covers you for your changes of use.
Gotcha. Okay, good.
We also took a look, and we analyzed, you know, the nature of what we'd be looking at in terms of wastewater constituents. The sewer systems we have now are a little different. I mean, you can look at a lot of references for what typical wastewater is, but a lot of those systems are older systems. You know, they're leaky pipes, they have a lot of extraneous water coming into them, so they tend to be a little bit more dilute relative to pollutional load. So these numbers are a little bit reflective, this is on page 4, of what we anticipate to see as far as the influent or wastewater constituents for a newly built sewer system. Now, these could change a little bit too, because we do have several alternatives for collection system types as well that we looked at. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But some of these parameters can change based upon how the wastewater is brought into the system. And I did have a note down below there. We talk about low-pressure sewer systems. We talk about step systems, which are septic tank effluent pumping units. In other words, you still use a septic tank, and then you have a effluent pump after it to bring it into the system. And then you also have steg systems, which are septic tank effluents going to a gravity system. So each one of these systems can vary the nature of the wastewater that you're seeing, and some adjustments would have to be made to these values to compensate for that. For instance, a low-pressure sewer system is essentially installing a grinder pump at each unit or each parcel.
Okay.
So all the wastewater, the solids, the grease, everything that goes into that wastewater is ground up and pushed into the system. So the concentration of the wastewater tends to be a little bit higher, you know, but the only facility you have on the property is basically the grinder pump. On some of the systems that use the septic tanks, you're actually settling out grease and settling out solids prior to it entering the system. So
Okay.
then the wastewater constituents become a little bit less. you
How does
know.
that play out for the longevity of the,
There's positive and negative aspects of each, and I
leaching
can
field,
talk
yeah,
about those a
okay.
little bit more.
Sure.
You know, why don't I just get into a little bit as far as on our planning aspects of it? You know, the first thing we did in terms of, you know, the main focus of having a feasibility study is to trying to find out what local alternatives you have available to you. And, you know, you could theoretically do a direct discharge or surface water discharge. That's very difficult to get permitted, where you have all the water supplies and the wells along the river and the low flows of the river. It's very difficult and probably impossible to get a surface water discharge permitted. So the typical solution nowadays is a decentralized alternative, and that's basically to take the wastewater, to treat it locally, and also then to infiltrate it into the ground through a subsurface disposal system of some type. So the biggest challenge for us on a local alternative is trying to find an area where we could do that. So we used Mass GIS information for a lot of the base information or desktop evaluation of those lots. This one basically is just your wetlands and surface water features with a lot overlay. So we can basically see some of the larger lots that are available and how much the extent of wetlands is on them, and basically, you know, where the other water bodies are that would have additional offsets relative to wetland protection. One thing I should mention is we did do an analysis, and just as far as how much area we would need, and some of the graphs that we did or generated for Georgetown were basically on page 5. What we did is, knowing the nature of a lot of the lands in town.
Hey Doug, you can come up here if you'd like. If you guys wanna come up, if you can't see, feel free to grab a seat. I'm sorry.
I'll just move a chair.
So, you know, a lot of the lands within the town have very shallow groundwater tables. And that's a problem relative to subsurface disposal, because in order to generate or to permit disposal area with the state, part of the process is basically doing some modeling, groundwater modeling, and projections of the mound that would be induced, a groundwater mound that would be induced by trying to load the land with the wastewater after it's been treated. So we generated a couple of curves here based upon a couple of different criteria: low transmissivity mounding and high transmissivity mounding. And that's basically the permeability of the soil. And we're trying to bracket it in terms of, you know, giving these conditions, you know, how much area are we going to be able to, or do we need comfortably to put in a system. Because of the shallow groundwater conditions, the best subsurface disposal system that's available currently is that of drip irrigation. And the reason drip irrigation is advantageous for shallow groundwaters is because you can put the drip about 6 inches below the surface in what we call the B horizon. So you have an A, which is the topsoil, subsoil area, then you have another subsoil area, which is basically the B horizon, and then you have the parent material, which is normally where you place and design a septic system for, that C horizon. But with the drip system, you're trying to take advantage of all the root zones of the plants and the grasses on the surface, and you can actually locate that in the B horizon, which gives you additional offset to the groundwater table. And usually that helps to the extent of maybe 1 to 2 feet, but that's significant when you're talking about loading up this land and generating a mound that could be 6 feet, 10 feet in height. Okay?
How big an area?
Well, that was the key. In generating these graphs, we were able to do it. We used these basically for the drip system. And what it came down to is if you had you know, a 30,000 gallon per day, in other words, the primary service area, your area would be about 2.2 acres that you'd need. Okay? With, you know, a higher loading rate, which would, in this case, we were modeling on the high range, about 75. That worked out to a little over 5 acres. So in terms of our flow, which is 70,000, it's about 5 acres that you'd need for the drip system.
That's maybe a stupid question, but have you ever used landfills that have been capped? Is that a possible?
Yeah, well, a lot of times they're capped.
Yeah.
With an impermeable liner.
Yeah.
Okay? And then if you try to induce a mound on that, the mound is starting from the top of the cap up.
And you couldn't use the drip for that because you'd have to go below the.
You're still gonna generate a mound that's several feet thick. Okay? So, it just wouldn't work unless you had, you know, 15 feet of sandy material on top of the cap. You know?
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
So, in terms of trying to find an area in town that's gonna meet that criteria, what we try to focus on was lots of 5 acres that were vacant or nearly vacant, okay? So we went through the analysis, basically we looked at the wetlands. In this case, we looked at soil slopes as well. Even though the drip can go on a slope, you tend to use more land area. And in terms of severe slopes for other types of systems, they're very restrictive. Another alternative besides drip is basically chambered systems, if you're familiar with those. Basically, it'd be a Caltech or something similar to that chamber, a plastic chamber, with a pressure dose system inside to distribute the flow. And that's advantageous if you have even greater thickness of unsaturated material. So we can actually bring the size down smaller if we have, thick drainable soils. But it's tough to find thick drainable soils in town of any significant area. So for the most part, all of our evaluations we're looking at primarily the drip system for use. But we also ID'd which areas had severe slopes. We looked at the contours as well. And we also always are looking at the well sites. Here we're looking a little bit further relative to protected areas. And you can see basically the well protection zones that would rule out a lot of the lots in those areas as well. We also have the wetlands, which are dispersed on a lot of the parcels. And again, one thing, when you're siting a system next to a wetland and you generate this mound, that groundwater mound or elevated groundwater table can't be allowed to break out before it hits a water supply or a wetland. So our proximity to some of these water supply area or water resource areas, we would need to provide proper offset and probably some filling to make sure that we don't have breakout in those areas. So these tend to be a little bit more restrictive. Wherever you see a water body in there, we usually have to have a larger offset. So. We also looked at some of the private conservation parcels, and there are several in there. And these are typically protected areas, but we've also found in some communities we are able to use them with an easement to some degree. Depends on what the deed actually describes as far as the protection. So you do have a lot of conservation areas, basically forested areas, areas that would have a part of the green belt or another association, 4-H. Even though these are considered conservation or in some cases non-taxable properties, there is some advantage to looking at them in regards to possibly locating a disposal system on them. And again, the language within their conservation restrictions would have to be examined. The other aspect was basically, and you can't see it from there, obviously, but we have a bunch of X's in here. And this is basically vernal pools, rare endangered species habitat. Those also have a large potential to restrict what we can do in some of these areas. The offsets to these areas is much greater than they would to a normal wetland area, and they tend to restrict lots as far as feasibility. So we also consider that when we're looking at a lot of the lots in the system. FEMA flood maps, basically the blue areas that you see in here are basically part of the flood zones. So again, those would be restrictive relative to what we can do. And again, we can't locate anything within the FEMA flood zones unless it's waterproofed or otherwise protected from flood. And that would include the collection systems too. Zoning and open space, we looked at that from a perspective, although all you really need is a town meeting vote to change something. For the most part, we wanted to try to look at that to see what was available to us. There were several private lots as well in our review that we looked at. Some we were able to gain access to, some we weren't, but we also looked at private lots because a lot of times a town can make arrangements with a private landowner for for use of their property, either through easement or through acquisition, and sometimes that makes economic sense. These are basically all the private and public lots over 5 acres. You can see basically the private ones are in pink. The public ones are in the deeper red. And we also have some of the protection areas in there. We also looked at some of the exempt parcels, because obviously some of these that are, come up as 5 acres or more in our open space could be cemeteries or church grounds or the like, so we excluded a lot of the lots that way as well. And this is kind of our composite map of what we ended up with for some of the lots. Out of those lots, we went down and took a look at about 25 lots roughly. And these are some of the lots that we found and examined as part of our study. You can see the town centers right in here. So we do have a couple of areas that are fairly close. This one is a primary area that we wanted to look at. These are basically the Pearly School and the high school. There's really not a lot of area on those grounds. Looking at some of the historical records on the Pearly, there's old septic systems, there's new septic systems, so it's fairly limited. It's also within the river area and abutting wetlands. And the groundwater table is fairly shallow as well. So the impacts on the schools, I think, would be significant if we would try to locate something there. There is one little spot at the edge of the property for the middle high school that might be feasible, but what we did is take a look at all of these properties. If you see this, a couple of these have dash lines on them. Those tend to be primary areas that would probably be feasible. Even though these are 5 acre plus lots, some of the areas on there are smaller than that, so we'd really, the next step after this desktop evaluation is really to do some testing on some of these lots that look most feasible. And that's really gonna determine for you, you know, without a doubt, as far as, you know, how big the areas you can place on those, the depths of the groundwater mounding that would take place on those properties, and if there's enough land for siting. But
Where is that primary one that you indicated?
this one here?
Yeah.
This is Central Street, so it's basically offset behind in the woods. Parcel number 1, I think I have an address for it.
I can't see the streets from here anyway, so.
Yeah, it's south.
Yeah.
Going towards Boxford, so
I would think.
after the cemetery? Or before?
Yeah, its address is kind of 8 Londonderry Lane.
Oh, it's up back,
Londonderry.
it's up on the hill. Okay.
Londonderry.
8 Londonderry.
But it's,
I think that's conservation, isn't it? Is that part of the
it could very well be, it's
I'm
a
up in that
town-owned lot.
development. Yeah, it's actually all behind the lot. I think they gave
Right, it's
50
basically open
acres
space.
to conservation, right?
Well, it was listed under the town of Georgetown.
Yes.
Not specifically the conservation,
Okay,
so it could be deeded open space, which is a little different than deeded conservation land.
gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And again, all depends what the deed says specifically on that, but if it's just deeded open space and it's town property, it's usable land.
Gotcha.
And it can still be open space to some degree as well. The drip system is very advantageous on that, in that it can wrap around trees, you can leave trees up. Basically, you can leave land fairly undisturbed with the drip systems. You might have to do some thinning and some, you know, basically to gain a path or a network, but
Yeah.
it is adaptable to that. It just increases some of the costs too.
How high is the elevation? Because I know that's like the 3rd highest point in Essex County, so what?
Pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of pumping and
Yeah,
all the mechanisms, I would think that adds significant cost, right?
it's not that significant.
It isn't,
The most,
no.
yeah, the most expensive option you have is finding usable land.
Gotcha.
You know, if it's at elevated, it's more electricity, but it's still feasible.
Sure.
So we looked at all of these lots, and I think we have on our back, our very last page that we have for you, is kind of an analysis of those and the impacts of each. But, you know, the next step is really to, you know, as far as beyond the general feasibility analysis, is basically to do some preliminary design steps. And those preliminary design steps is going to these sites and doing some soil testing. And the other aspect would also be doing some deed examination, you know, by council, basically to make sure that you have rights or can gain rights to those properties. So in terms of, you know, the majority of the analysis was focused and centered on trying to find available lands. We have found several. Now, the only problem being is this is your center of town, and the further you go away, the more pipeline, the more cost, the more road reconstruction you'll have to be doing. We also looked at it in terms of a regional option as well, and that was basically, you really only have one regional option available to you, and that would be basically going from up into Groveland and trying to tie into their system. It's pretty far. It's about 2 miles to get to the point where you could possibly connect. It would go to one of their pumping stations, so you would be basically paying long-term costs for the pumping and conveyance of the wastewater. There would most likely be some type of buy-in cost or impact, even though you're building the entire force main to get to that point. Their flow goes to Haverhill, so basically there may be some impacts cost-wise from Haverhill as well, in terms of a buy-in cost. And the other aspect is, once you're tied into Haverhill, you become a co-permittee of the Haverhill facility. So if they overflow, they breach, they do something that will create a penalty, you have added liability because you're a co-permittee, and your flow is contributing to that. So,
Any
Is
sense
that
of the
option
cost
feasible?
differential between those two?
well, that's what we're doing right now, is we're trying to get the cost for that
Oh, okay.
state highway. The cost is a little bit higher. They were just paving, so you have a moratorium that you have to deal with as well. So sequencing this work, you may want to look to, you know, it may take 5 years.
I thought you were looking
Have
at
you-
the right-of-way, though. No, the right-of-way, the electric company,
Yeah, what we,
potential for the rail trail?
yes, we were looking at that as well,
Oh, okay.
yeah. But some of it's been deeded to the budding owners, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
So it's no longer just, there's some portions that are like National Grid or something that are all their property, but then you start getting to a range of the rail bed that's, you know, you get 50 owners, you know?
So connecting to Haverhill through Groveland, is that feasible? Or are
It's
you
always
still?
feasible. It's, well,
Yeah, but-
I mean, have you
Cost-wise?
had any conversations?
I have.
And they're open to the idea of
yeah,
it?
Haverhill has,
Really?
has flow to give, and
Okay.
Groveland also has capacity in their system.
Okay,
You know, they've been looking at some expansions, or potential expansions of their system. So maybe they're looking at this as one avenue to help pay for that.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
certainly, you know,
you
having,
have that economic development, right?
Well, you know, what, town administrator and I actually, you know, talked to Haverhill about it, and they said they had the capacity.
right,
The problem in which they gave us, which is why we never pursued it, was they still don't have the systems for, separation of groundwater, to,
talking about the CSOs.
whatever it is, I don't know.
Combined sewer overflows, they still have drainage going into their sewer system.
Yeah, I think that was it.
So they still have overflow events.
Yeah, so, you know, at the time, which was, it's over a year ago now, that we talked to them, they weren't ready, you know, to take anything on.
Yeah, they also had an overflow event and got a heavy fine as well about a year ago. So I could see where they would be a little gun shy.
Yeah.
But that may not be simply based upon flows. You know, and they're separating their sewer from their drainage. Groveland has less of that on their system, and certainly you have none of that on your system. You know, it would all be brand new. So, it's still feasible from the perspective of your flow. 60 thousand gallons per day. In reality, that's your max day, or 70 thousand gallons per day, that's your max day. On an average day base, you're gonna be putting out maybe a third of that, certainly no more than half of that on an average day base. So that kind of flow to them is fairly insignificant. And it's feasible from the perspective of the two communities. It's just timing, intermunicipal agreements. You'd probably have to, do some things as well with the state legislature for yourselves. Typically, when you have a sewer system that's very restrictive as far as who can connect to it, because if you have the system here and you're putting a pipeline down all the way into Groveland, theoretically that pipeline has capacity to take more flow. So, case law has basically indicated a prevalence of people being able to connect to a pipeline
Oh, that goes near
if there's
their property?
capacity there,
Yeah.
if it goes by their property.
Yeah,
In your primary and secondary study, it's a total of 88 parcels of property you're talking about, correct?
Right, some of those are wetland lots though too, so it's even less.
It's even, oh, thanks.
Yeah, it
Now,
makes it even
and
worse.
I was, yeah, so as far as your capacity of the pipe going from Georgetown, whatever way it goes through Groveland to Haverhill, that would be built for obviously a larger number.
It would be,
Yes,
yeah.
because, 88 parcels, 13,000
yeah.
gallons is not,
No. I mean, basically, when you design a system like that, you have to look at the velocities in the pipeline, so
Yeah.
they are scouring. You gotta look at the head losses, because it is a long pipeline as well.
yeah.
So we had,
yeah.
you can see some numbers I think I placed in the bottom of that first table, as far as peak flows or peak hour flows. Sorry, let me get the page. Page 3, that bottom line, peak hour or max day flow,
Yeah,
40 gallons a minute, 90 gallons per minute. Those are just beginning numbers.
my pool pump's bigger than that. Okay.
It may be.
Okay.
No, that's not much.
Yeah, it's not.
know? I mean, you put in, and then what you have to also consider is, what are your long-range plans? Because you don't wanna have to put it in again.
Yeah.
I wonder about going to Haverhill, is that more like expandable
That is.
than building our own system? Because
is.
it would be limited, you'd have to decide ahead of time.
And right
many-
now,
what you're gonna do.
where we are in the cost, that is
Yep.
gonna be your more expensive alternative, but it also has the largest flow capacity for the
Yeah.
future.
Okay.
So,
Do you have any sense of just absolute numbers? How much would that cost?
I don't wanna give that yet.
Oh,
We're
Okay.
still running through to see if we have to do flowable fill or,
okay.
Okay.
Dan, did you also look into package treatment plants? Was that part of the scope?
Mhm.
It was, so that would be a third option, it sounds like, or no?
well, that's, that goes in conjunction with
Should
these.
be that.
Drip?
Yeah.
You have to have some
Before
place
you
to
even
put the
go into
water.
the drip
I see.
system, you'd be
Yeah.
treating,
I get you, okay.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Dan, what would you suggest after giving this presentation? What would be the town's best approach to possibly
I
implementing?
know I was gonna try running through it, but I still got another
Okay,
set of
Jumping ahead.
pages. So, why don't we just go into it? I mean, these are your areas, basically, your study areas. Just slide it over. It's a little tough to see from there, but what we've done is basically outlined a gravity collection system, and these are all 8-inch pipes that we're running through the streets. And it's gonna be a little difficult because, 8-inch gravity pipes, you already have a bunch of utilities in the roadways. You have the gas, you have electric, you have, you have your drainage, you have your water. So we have to find an avenue to get there, and generally speaking, that means the sewer goes down. We need to have basically an 18-inch gap between our sewer and your water pipe. Your water pipe's about 5 feet down, say 5.5. So add another 1.5 feet. You're at least 7 feet to your top of your pipe. You're in the range of about 8 feet down for your sewer. Then you add slope to that, and you also consider that some of these properties are piped out the back, and may have lower fixtures. So you're gonna be in the 8 to 10 foot range as far as digging in the state highway on a busy state highway. Costs are high, okay? So even though gravity, everyone likes, you know, do gravity, you don't have to worry about it, there's no pumps, there's nothing else. There's a lot of expenses to putting gravity, especially in the town center. We would also have a pumping station down here to then convey it to wherever we're bringing it. So then you'd have another pipeline that would then, you know, pump the flow to your final destination.
I don't think you can take a hole 8 feet deep in the center of Georgetown and not hit water.
Right, you gotta deal with water too.
Yeah, I think it's frozen someplace, and I'll find it at about 4 feet.
I should mention that one of the systems I mentioned earlier was the STEG, septic tank effluent going to gravity. Okay? So basically is, we've got a bunch of X's on some of these too where we know the septic tanks are located. Again, we have limited information. We didn't visit the backs of all properties and trying to find the covers. Based upon the Board of Health information, we have some of them. A lot of them tend to be in the rear of the property. So that means you have the septic tank and then you're trying to get a pipe to then to convey it by gravity, and that's usually a 2% slope to the street. So you don't really gain any advantage depth-wise with that system. You're still gonna be down fairly deep. You are removing solids with the septic tank before it goes to the gravity system. So in theory, you could cut down the size of your pipe to maybe like 6-inch or something like that. But typically, I wouldn't do that. You always want to have your system with a low flexibility, and if you're going to put in a 6-inch pipe, you might as well put in an 8-inch pipe. So there really isn't a lot of advantage in going the STEG system, okay? And then people still have to maintain their septic tanks and pump them out on a regular basis. And the big drawback is if they try to use, which they will, their existing septic tanks, they are probably leaky. They probably bring in infiltration and inflow from rainwater, from surface water runoff, and all that's gonna make its way into your system. And your flows are gonna increase to a point where they may not be controllable. So gravity is one option. STEG, less of an option as far as our perspective. Low pressure sewer, I've done a lot of low pressure sewer work, and I like the method. You got a small diameter pipe, you can go up, you can go down, you can go around. Basically, it's all pressure sewer system. There is a responsibility for the homeowners to install individual grinder pumps. But that works out fairly well. If their septic systems are in the back and they want to go to the front, it's a lot easier for them to do that. You need about 4 to 5 feet of cover, depending on your community as far as frost steps. Typically 4 feet's enough because you have warm wastewater inside the system, but at least 4 feet of cover for your piping, and you can convey that through a pressure sewer system. And in some cases, you don't need an additional pumping station to get it to your place or your final destination. The pressures in there are about roughly about 80 or 90 psi. Even though we say low pressure, that's kind of low pressure. But they can, you know, typically they'd be low, you know, because not all the pumps are on at the same time, but they have a maximum of about 90 psi. Those pressures could convey it pretty far, okay? I've had low pressure sewer mains that are 3 miles long without issue, you know? So, I mean, the low pressure system has a lot of advantages to it. You know, I'm not gonna stipulate what pump we typically use. I don't wanna get too proprietary, but there are several now on the market, progressive cavity type grinder pumps. Several vendors make them now. They are the preferred grinder pump for installation on some of these. And roughly the pumps are around $3,000–4,000 installed, maybe 6. And that was it. They would run the pumps and we would pump into the system, convey it to the point where you treat it and discharge. The big advantage is basically circumventing utilities and shallow burial. And the final one we also looked at was the step system. That would be the septic tank with an effluent pump. Now, this is an effluent pump, not a grinder pump, because you've removed the solids and the grease, so they tend to be a little bit cheaper. And in some cases, the pump can actually be installed in the septic tank as well. These types of systems are very effective. next to the pressure sewer system, they're, have similar advantages. In this case, though, because they have a septic tank, they actually reduce some of the loading on the system, but because you're pulling out the solids and pulling out the grease. The problem, again, you have is a lot of these old septic tanks are old, leaky, cracked, and they can introduce water into your system.
And
Okay,
people
they-
still have to have them pumped out, right?
And you still have to
periodically.
have them maintained on a regular
Right,
basis. And if you're on this system like this, there would be a regular base, you'd have to do it. And typically it would be an annual or every 2 years, depending on the size of the tank. But it does have its advantages, but also has the drawbacks relative to extraneous flows. So those are the main collection systems. And again, from my perspective, the low-pressure sewer for the downtown area is typically the best bet in terms of reducing burial depth and minimizing obstructions and extra costs associated with construction. The typical scenario as far as, this is one of our past jobs, this one was around 60,000 gallons per day. The typical treatment process is basically you would bring the wastewater flow into what we call a flow equalization tank, so that any peak flows are basically dissipated. The easiest way to run a treatment facility is to have a regular flow going into the process as throughout the entire day. Not to have a peak flow in the morning and a peak flow at nights. Basically to try to equalize the flow so that you have the process just running continuously in one mode. So we typically put in a flow equalization tank. We then put in a settling tank. Now the settling tank would still be needed even though you have, if you were using one of the step or steg systems with septic tanks, you'd still use that because there are always solids that recoalesce within the system, and you want to settle those out and get those out of the system. And there's also grease that passes through the system as well. And by the time it gets here, the water has cooled off a little, that grease starts to fall out, and you want to separate that from the process. You want to get it out of the tank. In this case, because of this was raw wastewater going in here, we had a primary septic tank, and then we had two secondary septic tanks or settling tanks, and then we pumped it into the treatment process. Now, the treatment processes that we have, I think I provided a little list as far as the general criteria or components that we had. On page 7, membrane-activated sludge, sequencing batch reactors, biologically aerated filters, conventional activated sludge, rotating biological contactors, some expanded versions of some of the Title V IA systems. They have Amphidrone, they have FAST systems, modular FAST, they have a bunch of different systems that are modular in nature and can be expanded up to these flow levels if needed. And then we have suspended growth media reactors. But those are kind of the types of facilities that are available for treatment. And each one of these has several manufacturers of equipment that offer products in that range. This is typically a packaged treatment plant that we're talking about. So in some cases, there are some of these components that can just be tanks underground. In other cases, they require an operations building. In some cases, they need to have the entire process in the operations building. Okay. In this case, this one was using basically a membrane activated sludge system. And in terms of the best quality for effluent, a membrane system is the best quality. Everything that gets treated in the system has to pass through a 1 to 2 micron filter. And basically the water comes out looking very clean, like drinking water. And in terms of treatment performance, the BOD, the TSS, all these are typically less than 3 or non-detect. So in terms of protecting your water resources, protecting your wells, protecting the overall groundwater quality, the membrane system provides a lot of advantages. Disadvantages, cost. It's a higher cost system, higher to operate, higher to maintain. You have to replace the membranes every 10 to 15 years. They're not cheap. But in terms of environmental soundness, you have to weigh that. In this case here, after the membrane system in treatment, and this was a package unit, I think for this 60,000 gallon per day plant, the treatment process itself here was about roughly $450,000 from the vendor. Installed had another 100,000, so about 550 for the process. But you also have a treatment building, peripheral equipment, chemical feed, all the tanks. By the time you get done, 60,000 gallons per day was the equivalent of about 1.2 million. Okay? Not counting the collection system. Just the treatment process. And then you have the disposal field.
Yeah.
You know, that's included too. In this case, it was a chambered system. Okay? And this is, you know, this is a permitted plant under the groundwater discharge permit criteria of the state. And they love membranes because they know they do a great job treatment and are very reliable. So it was a fairly easy process. This gives you a rough schematic of how the treatment tanks are laid out. The flow equalization tank, and that basically allows the flow to go up and down, okay, as it comes in, and it gives it a metered flow out to the other tanks for settling, pumping to the treatment process, the membrane reactor tanks, and then pumping out to the disposal field.
How
Dan,
much,
five-
well, I was just gonna say, how much land is needed for the disposal field
Yeah, that's
with that
I'm gonna ask.
treatment facility?
It really doesn't matter with the treatment facility. What's important is the percolation or infiltration rates of the soils on the site and the depth to the groundwater, okay? Also slope has a little bit to play, and those were the graphs I had presented earlier on. Those were the ranges of different perk rates, you know, all those points along the graph. As basically you went up to the higher mounding were basically the rates for higher applications, but you know, you would have to reduce the loading rate on the field based upon the soil type. And by reducing the loading rate, the system gets larger. So.
So what was the 5 acres then? Was that
That was that. Yeah.
for this, for package treatment?
Yes, it was for package treatment, but the 5 acres was assuming you have a tight soil. In other words, it's
Steve, you're on
20.
this hill, right?
Yeah.
You have a septic tank. You have a
No,
grinder?
it's, we have the package treatment, so it's for like 54 homes. It was built like 20 years ago. I
Yeah,
think
but-
they.
Where is it?
Do you have a tank on your property?
Little's Hill, it's actually Londonderry, it's off of Londonderry.
Okay.
I do not, it's just a pipe that
Goes
goes through,
out,
it's
goes
gravity
down to
fed, and
the-
it goes down to the
Down to
plant.
the plant.
And
okay.
there's a big leaching field there, and they got a bunch of tanks that
It's got
collect
the,
it.
so, you know, I've been in that building.
Yeah.
And it's got the filters and all that stuff in there.
Yeah, yeah,
But it only does the 50-so homes that are up there.
54 homes. Yeah, but they actually have a person that comes every day.
Yes, yeah.
That, on that, yeah.
Yeah.
Would that be the same thing?
Would
You'd-
be.
Yeah, you'd
Yeah,
need
DEP
someone
wants
there.
to see him 5 days a week,
Yeah,
and then on call on the weekends at least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's actually 2 of them. There's another one up on the other side of town, too.
And, you know,
Oh, there
that's,
is,
that's
okay.
another thing to consider here too, is, you know, some communities like to use their own employees to do the operations.
mhm,
It's very difficult though, to have backup and support and the licenses and the safety precautions. Other communities basically shop it out
gotcha,
and just have contract operators.
okay, okay.
Just getting back to one thing that I forgot to talk about a little bit more, we had talked about the pipeline going up the roadway and people connecting up. A lot of times what you have to do is you have to have a home rule petition to legislature so that you can establish sewer districts. And the sewer districts would be defined by specific lots. And when you do that, basically, anyone who connects up or wants to connect up would have to go to town meeting for approval.
That's what they do in Groveland, I
It's
think.
an overlay then.
Yeah.
Basically, it's overlay.
Yeah.
district,
Essentially.
That's flexible. You can grow
It's
it.
not zoning, it's
Yeah.
basically its own thing, it's basically sewer
Right.
districts. And also, that option, as far as going to the other community, you'd also probably wanna go to legislature anyways to extend the term. You know, I would recommend at least a 30-year term, and I think you need a legislative act to go beyond 20. A home rule petition to go more than 20. Unless it's changed. This is the interior of the treatment building. Basically, it's 75 by about 40. This one's a little spacious.
Oh, it's not that big, though.
They don't typically have to be this large. This was basically for a homeowners association that wanted to have a lot of other facilities in here as well, and some future expansion capabilities as well. This was close to an existing well field, just outside the 2-year travel time to the public water supply wells, and they felt that DEP would be imposing additional criteria on it at a later date. So, has some room for expansion. But it has basically the treatment process, it has chemical feed, it has the blowers, and that's primarily the main function, plus the electrical components. But a building this size, I mean, could easily cost you $200,000-300,000. And here's just some cross sections of the building itself. Just to give you a little idea how the drip system is, I gave you a couple of details on another system. We usually do them in zones, so that you dose one zone, the next time you dose another one, next time another one, next time another one. It allows you to basically distribute the flow a little bit throughout the area and helps to keep your mound down instead of applying it all at once in one location. Basically, it's just under the ground surface. Some of these are set up, depending on which vendor you're using, some of them are set up with flow back, coming back to a station to drain the system so it doesn't freeze. Other ones don't have that, they basically have the emitters on the bottom and it just drains itself. And basically these are dosed periodically and they also flushed periodically.
How about a 5-acre leaching? What about for cost? They 6 or 8 feet deep, whatever.
Actually, with the drip system, it wouldn't be down deep at all.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
The only thing that you'd have to consider is the mound.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so if you needed additional offset to the mound,
yeah.
because you have shallow groundwater tables, that means you'd be scraping off the loam, you'd be putting in a Title V sand, then you'd be coming back in and putting in the drip, and then covering it back over with loam. And it could be a mounded system, but basically it would be a system that gives you that offset to the groundwater table even with the mound. And that's all done during the initial stages of the permitting process with a geohydro study with the state.
But how much do they typically cost? You know, in terms of bringing all that sand in? That's usually pretty expensive.
Yeah, the sand is the expensive part, so it really all depends on how much sand you need to bring in. The system itself, you know, maybe $100,000 for the piping and the emitters and the valving and some of the other things.
But
The sand could
a
be
lot,
$200,000
like
to $300,000,
easy, I would think.
you know?
We had to truck dirt out of our Pembroke school because it had organic arsenic in it.
It's a little different
And-
hauling.
And
But you
if,
brought
we
in-
kept it on site, we kept the dirt on site. And if we had trucked it out, and it wasn't, I don't think it was 5 acres worth, it would have cost $1.25 million to truck it out.
I think Title V sand's running around $29 a cubic yard, which isn't that bad
Oh, okay, so,
now. I mean, it's still more than
It's like mulch.
borrow, but
yeah,
it's cheaper than loam, I guess.
yeah.
And this is basically some examples of the drip system going in. You can see how basically it's just furrowed in. They usually use like a ditch witch to put it in the ground. And then these are the loops and the emitters on the ends, and it's all buried. And it can be used for recreational fields and other things as well. This is an open field. This one was brought up. You can see with a lot of Title V sand in here. But you can also have it, like I said, if you have good subsoils, you can run it through trees, you can put it through woods. Again, if you can get a ditch witch through it, you can put it in. And there really isn't any issues with they have emitters or shields on where it drips out, and generally those have been pretty root-free. They have a little I guess a little disc in there that helps to hinder root growth within the units. So you can go right through trees and it's not too much of an issue.
Just going back, you mentioned doing recreational fields, you can put the leaching field on, right? Did you take a look at the East Main Street, the recreational facility? It's under construction right now, but it's almost across from the transfer station off of 133.
Yeah, no, I haven't taken a look at it. Is that on top of a landfill area, or?
No, so do we know what the,
Well, it's,
I don't know.
it's one of those areas that you would have to build the field up.
Yeah, it's wet.
that it's all wetland, yeah, okay.
You know, another spot is the upper fields at the high school. I don't know how big that is, but there's
Yeah, we did
least-
look at that.
Yeah,
I mean, it is a possibility up there.
and I would think it would
The
be less
soils
wet up there, maybe.
Less wet,
Yeah, less, yeah.
On a ledge.
yeah. And then there's the issue of, you know, putting it
Pumping it
in,
up there.
just impacting the fields as well, and then
Oh,
redoing
wow.
it, but, they stay green.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Not so much as the nutrients, I mean, the nutrients help, but, you've removed most of the nutrients with the
Right.
treatment process. It's really just the warmness of the water dripping.
the original, we talked about that a couple of years ago when we started thinking about this. And there's enough land out there, if you did it, you could create them another playing field. When you say you're worrying about
Yeah.
playing field, you create another one.
Yep.
Okay.
So, I
It's a good
mean,
place to put the building too, because it's away from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think those are all, charts. Now, any questions, I guess? Like I said, we're trying to finalize the costs now, going through the different systems. And also trying to calculate it for the regional alternative, which we're still working on a little bit on some aspects, like the flowable fill aspect.
you know, one thing about the regional one, I do know that the rail trail is looking to do something on that.
Yep,
So that they're gonna go through that,
I realize that.
that process as well.
Right, the question is, are they gonna be taking the land, or are they gonna be basically,
I don't
just
think
taking
they-
easements?
I don't think it's easements, yeah, I don't
Right.
think they take it.
There's a lot of easements there on some of those, because it has been.
It goes
deeded
right
over.
across people's front lawns, I understand in some cases, yeah.
Isn't that part of, it's like a 99-year lease or something with,
Well, I don't know about that. I just know that the rail trail is looking at that to,
Yep,
as a potential.
yeah, we had some discussions and trying to find out who actually owned it, but
Yeah,
it's,
I am familiar with the right of way of the
yeah.
utilities down there.
so before we take any questions, thanks again for the presentation, that was
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
very thorough. In terms of next steps and what you have remaining,
right.
what should we expect from?
Well, we're finalizing the costs now on all the different alternatives, and then we're gonna have kind of a recommendation section based upon those cost breakdowns.
Okay.
You know, one thing that it became fairly obvious is you have very few lots here that are in this. I think I saw some, you know, original discussions maybe in the master plan when I was reviewing that, you know, maybe something that would be 100% benefits to the users would be something that would go. But, I mean, this really would be a significant burden because of the overall cost for the treatment system, the disposal system, the collection system, having it just segregated to those, you know, roughly 80 lots. So typically, it would be dead on the water with 100% betterment situation. So one thing to keep in mind is, you know, some type of subsidy from the town, because it does provide economic benefit to the town center, would probably be appropriate in order to bring those costs back to a manageable level for the people who are using it.
Okay, great.
size
The other
of that
aspect is
would be the
looking at possible a little bit more expansion, and that's, you know, obviously you concentrate on the area with the most dense populations, you know, to try to distribute the costs. I mean, those are all possibilities that, you know, still need to be explored.
Sure, okay, great. And when can we expect the final report? Do you have like an estimated timeline? Or-
Yeah, I'd say about 2.5 weeks or so.
Okay.
We should have
Would you
everything
be
wrapped
willing to
up.
come back and just kind of wrap it up for us and give us
Yeah.
recommendations?
Sure. Do you
Next
want like
meeting?
a week to review it or something
Yeah.
like that?
Oh,
or-
that would be
Yeah.
nice, yeah.
Why don't we leave it at this, when you do have the study done, right? And we're gonna need at least a week of having it in our hands.
Right.
Sure.
You know, for our next meeting, we wanna be prepared, have all the questions
Yeah, that's a good point.
prepared and,
Yeah, I mean, what we can do too is we can issue it as a draft at that point in time, and then you have questions, comments. You know, think we should address something else, we can then, you know, make some edits and make a final version.
I think what's obvious tonight is that, you know, Dan's been working on a very large project for us, and now we do know why it's taken so long. This isn't just,
This was a very.
Yeah, it wasn't a
very
high-level look
educational.
at
I
it.
had no idea.
yeah, this wasn't just him, you know,
Yeah.
spending a few hours. I mean,
Right,
this is a
right.
heavy-duty analysis of,
Yeah.
you know, what are the possibilities
Yeah.
in a purely engineered manner.
Right, right.
Which the town hasn't accomplished, to my knowledge, in at least a very long time.
For this, not at all, I think, that I'm aware of.
And, you know, as a town planner, when I came here a couple of years ago, and a major part of the interview process was to present to the planning board the feasibility of possibly doing something like this. And a tremendous amount of costs, environmental issues, concern, and then finding out whether or not there's land available sufficient enough to handle a leaching system, a drip system. And then, you know, if that doesn't work, do we go out of town?
Right.
And, you know, the big question is this thing affordable? And I think that's what we're gonna be able to get to in an informed, a much more informed manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I wanted, and what I told everybody that was involved with this from the beginning, I do not want, as a planner, to be chasing my tail on this particular subject for years out.
Sure.
You know, let's come to you know, a factual conclusion on this, and that's the goal.
Right.
Can it be done, or can it not be done? And if it, say it cannot be done, you know, let's think of all the alternatives that could possibly
Sure. No, that's a
be
good point.
looked at. And that is, you basically have what you have. You have a slow growth community. And when you're talking about 4,000 or 5,000 more people to the town, that's over a very long period of time. That's not next year, that's not 10 years from now, as Dan pointed out, it's 40, 50 years out,
Sure.
you know, long after we're all gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of,
I think Jim's gonna hang around.
I will, yeah, I'm still gonna be here.
in terms of feasibility, the feasibility is there. It's just, you know, where is the best lot and location to locate it? And is it gonna take more than one lot, 2 lots? You know, how do you distribute that flow? So those are all questions, but they're all centered on site evaluation.
Sure.
And that's really the next step, is you get 2 things. You have, one is a legal review to look at some of the rights, because some of these lots are basically in conservation or open space or designated as such. And, you know, you have to look at the legal rights that you have in order to place a subsurface disposal system or wastewater disposal system there. I like to call it as a groundwater recharge system. But, you know, in terms of, you know, you have to look at the legal aspects on each property, and then you actually have to get out there and do the testing. Deep hole tests, perk tests on the lots, and that's destructive testing. Now, the cheapest way to do that is with, you know, your highway department or your DPW type of thing, you know, to do it with your own machines and go and repair it yourselves. The other option is basically to hire a contractor to do the testing for you, and that gets very expensive.
Gotcha.
So,
All right, great.
that's something you'd have to evaluate for the next step, but that is the next step, is basically doing the lot investigations.
Okay.
So from this point on, me staying in touch with
Yeah,
Dan,
absolutely.
and we'll schedule the next presentation.
Agreed.
You know, make sure everybody has the information beforehand
All right, great.
and have a chance to look through it, and then we'll schedule a meeting.
Awesome.
Okay.
So in case
guys-
it's just
yeah.
not next month, you know, we'll
Yeah, that's
just,
fine.
I'll
No,
just stay in
absolutely.
touch.
We'll
We've been in touch,
take our
you
time,
know,
yeah,
every
yeah.
other week at least, anyway.
Yep.
But now we all know how intense it has been for you, and, you know, why we've had to wait till.
Yeah, I apologize.
No,
I mean,
that's fine.
sometimes it takes a while, especially in some of the regional alternatives. Getting information is not always the fastest thing.
We're not impatient, we just wanna make sure it's done right, so that we really do have what we need to
Right,
make an
exactly.
informed decision.
Right. Do you guys have any other questions? No?
No, I
Okay,
don't think
great.
so.
Well, again, Dan, I appreciate the effort here and.
Well, thank you for
this
your
was a
time.
Great presentation. We look forward to the final version. So,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
thanks again.
Thank you.
Good night.
Those poor guys. have
Okay.
been an hour and a quarter.
Next up, we have a presentation on the proposed mixed-use development at the former Sadler's Antique Village, West Main Street.
Good
Oh, yeah.
evening.
Hey.
3-2, top of the eighth, if anyone's wondering. Red Sox.
Red Sox, oh, okay.
Yeah, 3-2 Reds. What is it?
3-2, top of the eighth.
Yep.
We have a man on first with one out, I believe.
Right on.
Is that what you've been doing?
Before you start the presentation, I always tell them.
Been here. I've been
Checking.
I've been tracking.
What game? What time did it start?
5.
Oh, at 5.
Yeah, yeah,
At 7.
because the National League game is on at 8 or 8:30, something like that.
I was like, wow.
They always start.
Yeah, yeah.
I go to bed early in Texas.
That's right. You don't have to stay up till 11.
Everybody gets a longer night's sleep than we do in the east. News is at 10.
While John's getting set up.
Welcome, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Nancy McCann. I'm an attorney in Danvers, and I am working with John Colantoni, who has acquired some property at 51 West Main Street, which is the Settler's Antique, as you're all familiar with that. And John would like to present to you a proposal for redevelopment of that property, which is going to include maintaining commercial in the front, within certainly a portion of the existing building, and then residential in the rear of the property to bring some residential into this section of the downtown, and will result in a significant cleanup of the rear portion of that property. John has been working with town staff as well as the Historic Commission, and has actually received the endorsement of the Historic Commission for this project. So, while I typically do a lot of the talking, I'm going to leave it to John tonight because he's intimately involved in the basic design of this, and very excited to present this to you.
Great.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for having us tonight. I appreciate it. Just before I get into this, I just wanted a little bit of history of myself with Georgetown. I grew up in Georgetown. We owned 71 West Main Street. Our family did from 1976 on. And then we ran Dealer Tires. Some of you might remember that building. That building was Kinson's when we started renting it. And then that first year we purchased it. And so I grew up and loved Georgetown and always hoped that I'd make full circle back. So in the early 1990s, we closed down the business. My dad had Parkinson's, and we started renting to Bob Alderman, who used to be an account of ours. We used to deliver tires to him, to his house. We had the big shop and everything. And so Bob Alderman was a tenant from like 1992 to, I think we sold it to him in like 2004, 2005. I lost my dad, Parkinson's, in 2002. And then by pure coincidence, Rita, my significant other, she is into antiques and vintage stuff and all that. So about 5 years ago, she started looking for a location. And out of the blue, we looked at like 60 locations. She said, "Hey, I got one in Georgetown."
Wow.
So she is at Vintage Vault at 14 East Main Street, and this is her 4th year in business there. So
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Sedler didn't remember me when I was a kid, but when I was going into high school, I was delivering tires to them when they were in full bloom there and had vehicles and the whole 9 yards. So when we heard some rumors that they were interested, I went in and met with them, and that was in the spring of 2017. And it took forever to finalize the deal with them, where we closed on it in March of 2018. But when we had it under agreement, we had 3 roundtable discussions with John and all the department heads. Really tried to do our homework to see what would fit with the idea that we wanted to do there. So here we are. So I'm very excited to be, back in Georgetown doing this. So this is the existing building as it looks today. I think you're all probably familiar with it. That's the very front. We want to keep this building, but what's behind it, meaning what I call the connector piece and the back piece, would come down. So if you look at this, everything that's hatch marked, this would all come down. The original front building, even though this might all have been built at once, the original front building is what the Historical Commission is in agreement with, that they'd like us to keep and restore. And we have no problem in doing that. That's what we kind of wanted to do anyway. So we're excited about doing that. This would come down. We would, and then we would do residential in the back here of 7 townhouses facing the pond, sort of making this whole area the way it should be, residential, and cleaning up this whole area, because over the years, 50 years of being an antique type place, it's kind of a mess now. So this whole thing would be cleaned up, and the wetlands would be put back together, for lack of better terms, the way it should be. So this is the existing as it is now. This is the main building. This is what I call the shack, that, believe it or not, this shack has its own electricity and its own water. Even though I was amazed when we found that out, it is just a shack. Some of these trailers have already been removed. There's only one left, and this has been removed as well.
You gotta remember who built the shack. To know.
I'm sure that there must be a story there.
What? Oh, is it?
Well, it
Good,
used to be.
sure.
Well, Sid Rogers owned the building from the very beginning.
Okay.
Then Roner bought it. He had a furniture store.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
I'm wondering the same
Over
thing.
the years, Mr. Roner,
The Eagle.
he ended
building
up
is right.
for a
Yeah, that's
while,
right.
he owned the building next door also. He ended up living in the building next door, and he had that shed built so he could
So
put
it's
his
the right
Cadillac
of this,
inside
right?
there.
Oh, is that one?
The
Okay.
water was put in so he could wash it.
That's behind the Eagle building.
Yes.
Oh,
So-
I've
so-
never seen it.
The Eagle building is right here.
Oh, all
And then
right.
there's sort of like a back parking lot behind the Eagle building.
Yeah, there is,
And
yeah.
this is sort of split here on the property
And
line.
he got electricity because he wanted an electric garage door opener.
It's all making sense now. It's all making sense. So that's kind of in the nutshell of the existing. Nancy, before I switch these around, anything?
Nope,
John-
you're doing
John, I
well.
just want to point out that John does this for a living, and how many years have you been?
Well, I've been doing real estate since I was out of college in the 80s. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a lot of development. So at present, and thank you, John, at present right now, just coincidence, all 3 of them in Davis. We have a 6 townhouse project at 25 Cherry Street in Davis, a 3 townhouse project at 2 Pond Street in Davis, a 4 townhouse project on Nickel Street in Davis. We have under agreement a house that was built in the 1800s in Ipswich that we're going to restore, and it'll be the streetscape will stay the same and end up being 4 townhouses. And then we have this project, and then we have a quiet, what I won't give the location, 8 single-family subdivision that we're in the process of getting approvals. So yeah, we're doing a lot of it, and the townhouse with the restoring, for some coincidence, Nancy, seems to be our little niche. I don't really completely understand it, but
It's your thing.
that's what's been happening. So this is a computer rendering of what we want to do to the existing building.
Beautiful.
Oh, that'd be the front again.
Yeah, so you're sort of matching it,
Oh,
all right?
that's nice.
Beautiful.
And then
The
I'll
clouds
do it this
kinda
way.
parted ways.
So, yeah. If we could only have it, that's bad. So this is again sort of the site plan. So that existing building I told you would come down is down. We would do an addition building here, which is about 1,100 square feet. That would, when we knock down the existing, would attach to the rear of this, and sort of go parallel. So it's not dominating this building at all. This will still dominate it. And just to give you an example, this is a slate roof. So we would keep the slate roof. That's what we're trying to do, and keep the two color. And when we take down the other building, part of that other building has slate roof. We would try to take as much of that slate that we could keep to help put this back together. Because the building is, and I don't know if you've been there lately, anyone, but it's, unfortunately, it's in real disarray.
Yeah.
It needs a lot of help. But we think we can definitely restore the front, and it'll be nice. Question so far?
That's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
That's- Yeah, it's,
Keep going.
Okay. All right. This is 7 townhouses. 2 of them would be 3-bedroom. 5 of them would be 2-bedroom. All probably 2.5 baths. All 2.5 story. Now, a lot of people say, geez, why couldn't you do a bigger addition here? Well, as we all know, it's just a coincidence that we're following the meeting that you just had. This is 1.7 acres. This is one of the reasons it took so long to put the deal together. It was advertised as 2.25 acres, and that's what they thought they had. But it never had been truly surveyed on all sides. So as everyone knows, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of times they did estimates. So anyways, 1.7 acres. So that half acre actually made a huge difference, because you need so much room to do a true septic system to run the correct commercial type business or 7 residential. So we can put septic systems under parking lots, as we all know, but we can't put it under buildings. So that's why the building is not as big as everyone thought that we would do here.
Okay.
So there'd be a separate system, septic system wise. It's also all been perked already. And Thad Berry is our engineer out of Reading. He's been working on the whole project. John Duggar is our architect out of Gloucester. John has met the team, and he'll be doing the architectural work. And they both work on a lot of our projects. So 7 townhouses that all have single-car garages, all 2.5 stories. If everything goes right, they would all have decks and patios. They're all staying out of the conservation 100-foot line, except 1.5 of them over here. The mitigation with that would be, if you remember the existing conditions, it's so encroached on the wetlands that we would be removing all that, cleaning all that up. So this is a much better situation than what's here now. Steve's been great with the conservation to work with, so we've been working with him. We're in this week. They hired the third party to verify our wetland mark on the property, so that should be all set this week. And then we hope to be in the middle of November for the NOI with the conservation. So we've been trying to move parallel with that. Our building permit has already been filed, which is just a technicality that we have to do to go in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So Les has that, the building inspector, and is working on that. And we've already filed for we've been in front of the Historical Commission twice. We went in summer 2017 to see if they would like our idea, and they did, and we said, we're gonna take that and run with it, and that's what we did, and we came back and saw them this summer, and that's when they gave the official vote in the letter endorsing our idea, including the 7 residential units in the back. And so the demo permit's been filed in the last couple of weeks as well, so the clock is ticking on that. Our next step will be, we're just waiting for Les, and Nancy will help us file for the zoning board of appeals and the planning. So all the departments have been right in tune with us and helped us, walk through the whole process, which has been wonderful. Everyone's been great to work with, and we hope to, hopefully, knock on wood, be in front of the zoning board of appeals by the end of the year. So,
Show your board with the townhouses.
okay. So this is the front of the townhouses. And this will give you an idea of the back of the townhouses.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Don't cheat like that. What's the score?
8-2.
Wow,
8-2, really?
All on the top of the eighth?
Yeah, Jackie Bradley just hit a grand slam.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Wow.
See, that's a good omen.
See? Believe me, I'm following, but I have this on my left eye.
Well, I'm looking at it.
I just said, yeah, on my left
So-
eye, this is right eye.
So this sort of gives you the front. There's 7 townhouses, and this gives you the rear of the 7 townhouses. So what we've been talking about with Steve from Conservation is would be out of the 100-foot line. There'd be a meadow that would be, first of all, the wetlands would be recreated, if that's the correct technical term. And then there'd be a meadow that would be created for 50 feet, and then be 50 feet of lawn. So that lawn can be taken care of on a regular basis as part of the townhouses. So, Nance, what did I forget?
I don't think you forgot anything. So this obviously is going to involve Conservation Commission, Board of Appeals, and Planning Board. We would be going to Board of Appeals first for a special permit to allow the multifamily aspect of this project, because we are in the commercial business district, or business commercial district. And then we will be going to Planning Board for site plan approval. And hopefully we will be well received. John, why don't you put the site plan up again, and let's just talk for a second about circulation around
Can I ask a
the
question
site.
before you? I just want to reiterate. So I think either yourself or someone mentioned that you've actually gone. You had a meeting with all the board
No, with
heads
staff.
already.
With the staff, staff members through the planning department and with the
Okay.
historic commission, but not with
Just
board
so
members.
everybody knows, this,
Right.
this dates back, the meetings we've had with John date back to March of 2017, so
Yep.
they've been working diligently on this project.
Yeah, but I mean, like Steve, has seen this, right? Over at conservation, has the ZBA have they seen this already? I mean,
No.
not from a
No.
They haven't seen anything yet.
Nothing has been filed officially with the boards
Yeah.
yet,
I mean, just.
other than conservation.
No, correct. I just wanted to see if
Right.
anybody kind of put their eyeballs on this and just kind of said, "Oh, okay."
Staff,
this
yes.
is- Yeah.
I mean,
And
just dealing with the
agents.
particular zoning matters.
Sure.
And defining what can be allowed and what permits are necessary, and,
The parking is all on site?
Yes.
Yes, so let's talk about how this works. We've got 2 curb cuts here, John, if you want to point out how that's,
Yeah, there's currently
Kinda
3 curb
separated.
cuts, one here, and one here, on the site. So with this curb cut would stay the same, which would just be an exit for the residential. And then this becomes a turn in here, and this, to make it the traffic easier, would be 2 lanes coming out, one going left, one going right.
so primarily that, I guess it's the westerly exit is going to be geared mostly for the residential folks in the back that will come down that tail. And the commercial traffic, that'll be an exit. And then the commercial traffic and parking is all up centered in this, at the front of the site.
And that, there's a berm that runs down between the 2 buildings. That would, with those.
Right here is, I think, where
That's
you're talking.
basically gonna stay the same?
Yeah, it's probably gonna
Gotta be redone.
Redone, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I follow that. Oh, That's good to me.
And that whole front building will be commercial, will it, pretty much?
Yeah, so, we don't have tenants or anything for this yet.
right.
But septic system wise, what is being designed is the new addition, like first floor,
Yeah,
could be restaurant,
really?
but it only can be 28 to 30 seats with what the size
Still,
it
Maybe a
is.
small coffee shop.
Coffee
type
shop,
of-
something
I
like
mean,
that.
that's more than
Yep.
Yeah.
A
And then
lunch
the other
facility.
places.
what we're doing for the septic system for this is, if it was retail or office space, it'd be able to handle either, because the septic system is being designed for the one that takes the most. Same thing with the parking spaces, so it could handle either with no problem.
Well, how many square feet would will that building be in total when it's done?
When we're done,
Yeah.
double 1,100, I'm just rounding off by
Yeah.
2 here. And then, is this another like
About
1,100?
4236 is what you came up with
Yeah.
for the whole
The
building.
whole
For
building,
this,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, John, if I might, so what would be on the second and third floors?
Of this?
Yeah.
I'd be lying to you if I told you exactly. But again, could be office space, could be retail.
Personal
Hopefully
service
ten.
type of space?
So, all right, so you're not looking at putting residents?
No.
in?
No,
No,
no.
it's all commercial.
This is all commercial here. The resident is only down here.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So though it's all one lot, we're trying to separate a little bit.
Hmm.
We thought it'd be really nice for the neighborhoods here and to clean up this wetlands, but this is sort of, all stays residential.
I think it's great.
You know, maybe we can, as a board, just as a, recommendation, maybe we can help in, that ground level. I know you mentioned, kind of a coffee shop, but, I think, you have one across the street technically, from there, the way we also have Dunkin' Donuts, we have, so between sub shops and coffee places, we have a plethora of those. So,
We have a lot
maybe
of
this
hairdressers,
board,
too.
Yeah.
is something that maybe we can help draw a different kind of business
That would be nice,
to
yeah.
that site and just be a help to you and trying to do something, different that might work there.
Sure.
Because we certainly don't want, something to go in there and not work, So-
Exactly, which is why in the design, as John said, for parking and septic, we've erred on the high side so that we have the flexibility to put whatever kind of business we might want to have in there.
So, John, is the goal for tonight for us to write a letter to the Board of Selectmen to say that we're in favor of it, or to other boards, or what is the?
It would be, say, a letter of support for the project from
Okay.
this committee.
So not to any specific board, just to the town? to the
Haven't we
town,
got
yeah.
one of them?
Yeah, well, it'd just be a matter that, we
We already got one from the Historic Commission.
Yeah, the Board of
right?
Selectmen, received, a letter from, the Historic Commission.
Yeah.
That we acknowledged also.
And I have copies of that if you want to see that, if those of you who haven't seen it. And that's what we would be looking
and-
for.
And it would be part of their submission package.
Right.
to the
Right, right.
ZBA, the planning board.
Yep.
and Conservation
Exactly.
Commission.
You wanna make a motion? Who wants to?
Yeah, does somebody want to make a motion to?
I'll make a
Go
motion
ahead.
that
Go ahead.
the Economic Development Committee should put a letter together of support to be distributed amongst the,
So ask John to put a letter together
yeah,
first.
John, to the various boards that they will be attending.
Okay, second.
All right, so we have a motion, second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye, for myself, it's unanimous. Yep.
Got it.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a
Appreciate
great
it.
Yeah, looks
presentation.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad to see it.
I think it's gonna improve the area immensely.
Thank you.
Also,
And if,
Have
and if,
staff.
and if we may ask, the historical commission was great with what they did with their letter. They just didn't mention the commercial piece and the restoration, but they also mentioned the residential piece. So that would be great if that could be in your letter of support, because I think the combination of both will bring a lot to downtown.
John, you have the letter, right, that was written? So, you
Say,
could
we
probably echo
concur
that.
with the findings
Yeah,
of the
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And expand it a little.
How long do you, think that this whole project will take once you get started?
If we got the approvals,
Hey, you got them tomorrow.
if we got the approvals tomorrow,
Do you have this
we could
letter,
be
John?
in great shape in 12 to 15 months.
12 to 15 months further? Okay. Very good.
Feel free to attend any of the board meetings and speak in support. That would be wonderful.
I like the concept.
I thought it's a very nice, I think it would look very nice down there.
Listen,
Very nice
based on
concept.
what's there now,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
really
that's
kind of flows into what I think maybe a long-term vision, that this town might have. I think this fits in, really nicely with that.
Yeah, I think the village concept was kind of what, when we were going through the strategic plan.
Yep.
That was a big piece of what people wanted the downtown to look like, and I think this has that look.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get into the real details, but we want to keep, when we restore that, we're going to tie that look into all the townhouses too. Like, the woodwork and the trim and the tops of the windows, and we'll tie the whole thing in to give it that look.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Nice.
That's
Slowly
terrific.
but surely, it's all going to come together. The Olson project is going to go forward.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that has all the approvals.
Oh, wow, great. Yeah.
And I would say as time goes on, I think the board needs to be maybe a little active, with helping, certain projects like these, because I think we need to drive, really eye-opening, core
some
projects like
development
this,
downtown, yes.
and kind of really help
true.
some of our businesses, kind of get the name out there. Hey, let's, look what's going on, that kind of thing. And that's what I mean about maybe driving a business and helping, here and getting the right kind of business in there. So I'd like to, as a board, be active in helping, you out with this.
That would be
So,
great.
Yeah, if we can stay in touch, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do that.
Great.
Awesome, great. Well,
Thank
I
you very
appreciate you
much.
coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
the
you so much.
information, Yeah,
Looks great.
wish you guys luck. All right. So the next item we have update review of the 26-acre town-owned National Lab property. So if you want to give us a quick update on that, John.
Yeah, since the last meeting, when we were talking about acquiring the services of a survey firm, we do already have in hand the two-lot A&R proposal for the National Ave property. I have copies of the plans here, I could put it up on the board too if we wanna.
Okay.
So we have that plan in hand, and I have it scheduled for a planning board meeting next Wednesday night for them to act on. Let me see here, hold on 1 second. Here's a hard copy if anybody wants to look at it. As suggested, everything was, the two lots are created pretty much bisecting right down the middle of that wetland. That would be the line. What you'll probably find surprising is the size of the southerly lot.
Yeah,
How's that?
It's twice the size as anticipated.
It's what?
Twice the size.
One's 12 and
So
one.
John, this is
National
what
Lab. Okay.
the surveyor did for us, right? That's not the, okay,
Oh, all right.
fantastic.
So, which one do we own? 13, oh, 13A,
We own both of those,
13A and 12A.
Yeah, 13A
Oh,
is the
that's the
smaller one.
divider. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
13A is the smaller one, John, right?
Yeah,
And 12A
12A
is the
big one.
larger one.
All right then.
Wetlands, okay, fantastic.
Oh, it's in, I didn't realize in the back end of that's in
Probably
Rowley.
about a 3-acre difference. I thought like a part of it was only supposed to be like
I
5
thought
acres
this
or
was
something.
5, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't realize
worked
that was
out that-
10 acres,
it
yeah.
just worked out that way, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's
Well, it's great.
the
Yeah, I'm not
buildable
saying-
area.
No, I know, I.
Because it has pocketed wetlands.
Oh, wait a minute, although this one's smaller than we thought.
Yeah, I
Right?
thought we said that this was like 18 or something, right? Was that what we were thinking?
No, I thought it was like in the
That was-
12, 13,
There's
14.
more upland,
That was-
you know,
Over here?
less interruption with wetland.
Yeah, yeah,
See the
yeah.
wetlands
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
that are associated with it.
There's only one spot here, but there's a few over here, right?
Yeah,
Especially this.
especially at the front end, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at this
And
thing.
then this thing
goes
right in the middle.
through.
Actually, I
How
didn't,
the access here is gonna be over at the larger lot?
Yeah.
And then you would have to,
Yeah,
You
I'm
say that
trying
you
to
do
get
a
this
bridge
on
or
the
something?
screen here so we can all look
I
at it.
thought if we could, the idea is to come in from the cement
Oh, from the
company,
cement,
yeah.
Well, possibly, maybe, we still we still have thoughts about the front,
Oh, you mean getting this?
yeah. Yeah. Possibly, maybe.
Yeah, sorta, kinda.
Here we have it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm gonna zip it out a little bit there. Okay, so by looking at, this is National Ave here.
Right, right.
Um, just to orient you, there's the north arrow there. So when you're talking about the north property, the entire border of the town-owned parcel is this entire property here. As agreed to by the Board of Selectmen, Economic Development Committee, we asked for the services of a surveyor to come in and subdivide the property for us and prepare that plan for the planning board for an A&R plan. This has been submitted, and it is scheduled to go before the planning board at next Wednesday's planning board meeting.
Next Wednesday?
Yeah. And
It's
so
just
this
not
is,
tomorrow, it's a week from tomorrow.
it's a week from tomorrow. So this being here, the arrow, this would be the north lot.
Yeah.
And as you can see, zone in a little bit here, bring it down. That's 13.69 acres. It has a little bit of an accessibility issue, as we're all familiar with.
Right.
And then this would be the southerly lot. Again, the subdivision line bisects roughly the middle of the wetland that runs entirely east to west on the property. So in effect, you have naturally, caused by a substantial wetland, two building envelopes that are separated, and the property could not be developed
As
in
one
its
piece.
entirety as one
Right,
piece.
right,
So,
right.
you know, what I'm explaining to the planning board in the comments report for next week is that, you know, the only thing that keeps this from being two lots legally is a separation line. It is naturally two lots. So this second lot, the southern lot, is 10.9 acres. Now, this, surprisingly, you know, doing a survey and having the actual numbers before us, this has 214.23 feet of frontage on National Avenue.
Yeah.
And the actual right-of-way is part of the lot, as you see the layout.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So from
So this has frontage, so that has
This-
access.
This has frontage, and it's been considered that it may provide actual accessible frontage with wetland buffer exceptions being provided. And that would be by the Conservation Commission if allowed. So
Right.
that would come in through this
Right,
avenue here.
right.
The other alternative is the abutting property has an existing driveway over.
How wide is that, John?
It's been estimated here, that's 50 feet in width. So you can put a sizable driveway into the property.
You'd have to have buffers on the driveway to
That's
the
correct.
wetland.
So that spike strip isn't in play at this point?
No,
Not for the
here.
south, no, not for the
here.
south lot.
Okay,
No.
gotcha.
It is surprising what happens when you
When
actually
you get
have
the
an accurate
facts.
survey. Yeah. Now, so that's important, and then, you know, because an A&R plan has certain restrictions
What's
involving the law,
The A&R plan is what, again?
approval not required, and what that means is subdivision approval not required. A subdivision of land technically means that a new roadway is being built and you're subdividing a main parcel into multiple parcels.
Okay.
But more than one.
Yep.
And you're building a roadway. So that's a subdivision. An approval not required plan is a plan by which the lots have frontage on a public or private way substantially established in accordance with provisions of the law that
Okay.
you do have access.
Okay.
That's recognized by a community as
Okay.
accessible for emergency services. And this is the note, working with in the interests of the town and working with the surveyor, this is the note we came up with. I'll just blow it up here. And I believe this should be, you know, sufficient enough when it does go before the planning board. Endorsement of the plan is for conveyance purposes only concerning lots 13A and 13B. What that means is establishing the lots for conveyance, so the town can convey out in accordance with state provisions for selling municipal properties. Two parcels rather than one. The statement goes on, both of which lots shall not be considered buildable until accessibility is provided in accordance with the provisions of the Mass General laws and local bylaws.
Okay. Where's 13B?
It's
13B is the north lot. Let me zone.
12A is the north lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it says 12
It says 12A.
Hold on, you guys have it in front of you. I have to zoom in here. hold on. Yeah, so 12A is the north lot, 13A is the south
Okay,
lot.
yeah, so it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, you see the issue with lot 12A.
Right.
That's that wedge-shaped lot that,
Right.
that's come back to haunt us.
So John, Mr. Chair, may I?
Yeah,
So listen, if this is wide enough, where we have a frontage, okay, couldn't someone who was interested, why couldn't, if I just stand up here, why couldn't we actually have someone who could get in here
Oh, yeah.
and basically build I know we have wetlands here, but maybe get some kind of access where, like a common road would kind of just flow down here.
Well,
You know,
you see,
and-
that's a substantial wetland. I mean, that's,
That was
that's a
the question.
bridge.
So,
That's a
It would
bridge.
be a
so why
bridge,
don't
yeah.
we put a bridge? And that, no, I'm serious.
it's not economical,
No,
or,
no, I'm just saying, we don't need to do or think in that manner because, ultimately, this north lot
Yeah.
will either become part of the abutting property, right, which is for sale, combining both. The existing owner is willing to work with us if we end up having a developer that's willing to work with both parties in developing the property. Also, there's accessibility from the rear property, and that's the building, the former Solomon warehouse.
Right.
There's accessibility over that existing driveway to get into the property.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So you don't
already have
need the front.
Right. So
it's
you have
not-
potential two competing parties when this does go out to bid. That's what we're assuming, it will go out to bid, if that's what the town ultimately determines what to do with the property.
Okay.
So.
So that's good news. We don't have to. We
have
don't have. We don't need
really
that front.
great news. We have,
Okay.
again, you probably have multiple parties involved with this south lot. With the potential of actually, we have frontage that's accessible.
This becomes much more valuable than we thought it was.
Right, and the thing is with Mass General laws, if, the only means to get to your buildable portion of your property is to encroach upon, wetland setbacks, there is provision for that. You just can't say absolutely no and not allow people to use their property in a productive manner.
You could probably move some of that wetland if you
Yeah.
wanted to make,
Reestablish,
setbacks for the
But
road.
But the other alternative
This-
is to
this is
work
kind of a pain,
effectively
but
with
it's a lot
the
smaller
abutting
than we
property,
thought it was.
as we know.
Okay.
So, we all understand this. The next step, the most important step, is getting this endorsed. From that point in time,
Yeah.
the town would be eligible to prepare for the conveyance out, the bidding process, if that's what the town ultimately decides to do, to sell the property.
John, a couple of questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I just had a
Wanna
quick
keep the
one.
property, whatever.
The adult entertainment district, do we have to get rid of that before we,
No.
that won't?
No,
put
you,
us in a-
no, a municipality by state law, this was back in the 90s that it was established, 5% of any community's landmass has to be dedicated to, the X factor.
Okay.
Call it for a better word, the adult.
But if somebody purchased the land, that wouldn't,
down there.
we wouldn't be able to prohibit them from doing something in that
Well-
back area, right?
I don't think anybody's,
Oh, I don't know.
they won this case and, there's no demand for it.
Gotcha.
I mean, all the demand, if anybody wants it, they can go on the internet. That business is out of business because of the internet.
That's what you look at Route 1, what that used to be like, and now there's nothing down there, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, so that's
Hannah's
a,
still this
and
All
the- and the combat
virtual
zone and
reality
all of that.
provided by the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, if that's your sort of thing. Anyway, you do have, this property is zoned industrial.
Yeah.
And it's also zoned our overlay district.
Okay.
Okay,
John, excuse me.
yeah.
The so you just made a statement that it's going to go before the planning board on Wednesday. So two things. Number one, is the expectation that not only is this going to be presented, but it will be voted on.
Yeah.
All right, so it's not going to be
Yeah, the
another
plan-
meeting after that. Where
An approval not required plan by state statute has to be acted on within 21 days of submission. And this was formally submitted by the town on the 15th,
Oh, okay.
on the what?
on the 15th of this month. So
Which was yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Mike signed it.
and secondly, so when you say if the town decides, what specifically are you talking about?
I'm just, whatever the town, and the town being the Board of Selectmen decide.
Well, and that's what I,
Disposition of
so is it the board of, I didn't know if it was.
Does it need to go
Board
to
of
vote to
Selectmen,
town,
yeah,
to town meeting, or no?
Well, we, the town, own it by tax title. We own it free and clear. The conveyance of the property, it's not us buying something, we're selling something. It has to
Right,
go
but-
through a proper bidding process.
Right,
And-
but then the ultimate decision, does that go to town meeting?
No.
It doesn't, okay.
In that part of it, I feel much more comfortable with you talking directly with Mike.
Gotcha, okay,
Okay.
all right.
And, but as far as the bidding process, from what I understand, we can put provisions
Yeah.
in the bidding, i.e., what kind of the minimum we'll take, what kind of property has to go in there, whether it be an industrial building or, right? Something along those lines. So we,
You
so we
would-
can put all that.
Yeah, you would put the conditions of.
I mean, you don't have to
potential
sell
use
it
of
either,
the-
do you?
What's that?
You don't really have to sell it.
That's,
Well,
I mean, you might want to, I don't know, but you don't have to.
no, you don't have to do
Oh, no.
anything you don't want.
Yeah.
But, just, the whole purpose of this was to create the optimum potential
For
for
development.
rate of return for the town.
Yes.
I think the accessibility is a huge.
That's a
Yeah, it is.
big change from what we thought, yeah, yeah.
Was either that or we're gonna have to either sell it without, which would have decreased the value, or buy the frontage for $350,000.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, technically we didn't know where we
Yeah,
were
that
gonna
wasn't-
get.
Yeah. All set?
Okay, we are.
Okay, cool.
Might as well rip through this agenda.
Yeah, I appreciate the
Okay.
update on that,
you want
Mike.
this back?
Yes, I'll need those back.
Okay, and that, I think the last item here was to review on economic development activity at exits 54, I-95, Route 133 interchange.
Yeah, and I just briefly want to say, and I know you probably hear this, but it seems like in realistic terms, because the economy is on fuego, every parcel that has been out on sale or for sale for 2, 3, 5, 10 years along Tenney Street, Jewett Street, everything is under agreement. It's recently been sold. We're waiting for plans to come in on multiple properties. But I'll give you a for instance. The engineers are so busy and backed up. That's what takes so long for these plans to actually show up before the planning board and the ZBA and the Conservation Commission. Carlton Drive, I'll give you for instance, the company we had in
Yeah.
last week, they're still waiting for their plans, their engineered plans for the accessory building they want to build. And we're trying our best to work as quickly as possible with them when the plans come in to hold the public hearing, get the ball rolling at the local permitting process level. I just got the plans in today for the CVS property right here for the residential.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We're working as hard as we can relative to the planning board schedule to, get them on the docket and see if we can get them through the process in a, reasonable time frame.
Sure.
So that's a little bit more complicated than the applicant thought it was. And, you have to determine all this stuff zoning wise, and there's a buffer zone that, because we don't have that E code, the bylaws up to date, it's really hard to flush out the actual zoning that's in place over here. And especially to the buffer, because when the building was built, it was a 50-foot buffer. And then later on, the town changed the buffer between commercial and resident to 100 feet. So,
Gotcha.
it took a while for that. We just got the plans in, so that's working. I got a proposal this week on another property that's been languishing for years along 97 on the way out of town. That may
Oh.
very well become another townhouse development, a smaller scale
Tim
townhouse.
Lizzie's area, is it? Or the
In
old
that
Tim Lizzie's?
area.
Gotcha. All right.
So, there's a lot of activity, a ton of activity going on. And, we're probably going to see the benefits expanding our tax base wise.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, over the next year or two.
Yep.
And again, the engineers are so busy, there aren't enough of them to keep up with, all the work that's, upon them.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think the schools is probably something that we need to keep an eye on, right? If we're doing townhouses, we're doing a lot more development, that may bring in some revenue, but then it's gonna offset with the cost.
Services.
Yeah, for education and services.
So the interchange is just in general, everything down there?
Yeah,
But again, you gotta keep in mind, most townhouses, you know, don't generally produce a lot of, you know, school-age children.
family, yeah,
Yeah.
But if I may,
yeah, okay.
you know, those are 3 bedroom, 2.5 baths. I think those are really those are designed for families. I don't see retired folks or
Yeah, but then again,
you know,
you-
single
you-
people.
You
kinda
really
moving
have
in
to
there.
keep in mind,
Only 2 units,
the
so.
families today are not 5 kids. You
But
you
they're
know,
only a
you
couple,
get
huh.
one. You know, in a
Need
single-family
more
home,
dogs living down there.
in a single-family home, the amount of school-age children for a public school system, it's down to 0.6,
Yep.
4% or lower. You know, there's actually revenue produced relative to that single-family home. There's a net gain today. It used to be, you know, a loss.
Yep.
But people aren't having them. Typically aren't having 5, 6 kids, and, you know, everybody's having them, and they're all entering the school system. You know, if anything, they can agree to one thing, there's a slow, steady growth of the
Yeah,
population.
that's not gonna, I would
But
think.
the school-age population, you know, is not exponentially growing, it's growing, you know, at a slow, steady pace too.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I might,
Um,
if you look at the.
Hold on,
housing- I'm
Doug, I
sorry.
don't know if you can talk.
Yes, I can, I have.
How? No, I mean, we got 3 of us here. I don't know if you can participate. That's a quorum.
Oh, for
You,
selectmen?
you can't comment.
I don't know.
If
Yeah.
I'm okay, I've been already warned about it, that's why. So I'd rather not. If you wanna talk singularly somewhere, that's fine, but I don't think we can do it in session.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what the rule is.
So 2 things that I wanna throw up is, number one, to update the board. Had you talked to Mike, about what was presented by Senator Tar and Representative Mayer at the last
No,
meeting?
not yet, no.
Do you wanna maybe talk about that at this meeting?
No, I'm not prepared to talk about it. I just got a hold of them briefly. I have to get more details. I talked to Mike briefly about it,
Alright.
but
Can I just throw out a blurb about it, just so that,
you can. You
Okay.
probably know more about it than I do at this point.
Mr. Chair, you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
So just for the other members here, they joined us in telling us that the state legislature has possibly, you know, and I say possibly because it's a pool of money, up to about $1 million, okay, on projects that, would, you know, support business development. Okay, so, you know, if we identify projects, okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, on this, but, the way I heard it is, it's a process, you have to submit the information, and it could be, you know, long in terms of the process, right, so we'd have to issue it, you know, early. But with that being said, there is money out there, okay, for business development, we just have to get the packages to them. So when we talk about what was presented first
Yeah.
tonight, talked about
Yeah.
some big numbers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think those are the kinds of projects, maybe, I don't know, what are your thoughts
Well,
on?
I think that the verbiage that we read said at least 1 million, or I don't think it said up to.
Oh, what was
I
that?
think
See,
it
that's what I
said
mean, I'm trying to remember
minimum,
back.
but, yeah, I think the big message there, was it's an opportunity, but we have to convince the governor, that our plan, you know, with other towns.
That's the thing, there are other towns.
That our plan is, you know.
More
is the
worthy
best.
than the other towns.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right, right. So,
I was just
Hey,
picking.
if we
That's all
can
right.
get regionals, so we're talking about with Groveland, you know, the first topic, he had suggested that that's always good if you can get other towns involved, that would help as well.
And I don't know if
So,
the
yeah.
sewage, treatment plant is business development or not. For us, it is, right? Because we could
Oh, but I
probably
think
add
it would,
water.
because
Yeah.
it does
It'll spur.
create more, more economic
yeah.
development.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
That's
That's-
it's an
yeah.
incredibly complex issue. The sewer and
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
It's got a lot.
Yeah.
It's an
There's a lot.
expensive, complex
Right.
issue that, in all honesty, if it was tackled, many decades ago, when communities were more in tune with it, and there were a lot of federal dollars involved with sewage, that would be one thing. Trying to put our arms around this and move in that direction, it's a long-term goal. and
Sure.
It's a big,
He had-
expensive item
he-
to
he-
undertake. So,
He mentioned the one point, you're talking a 5-year moratorium before you're gonna dig a hole between here and Groveland. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But to service 80 properties,
Yeah.
and,
No,
we're
it's
dealing with, a minor amount of effluent
Yeah.
treatment. It's really minor, but you're probably at least talking total package at 5 million,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well,
10 million,
Yeah.
I would think it's in the 5 million range. I tell you, we had Rich, what the heck's his? He thought it would be 25.
No, but you know what it is, like Dan said,
Started guessing,
if it's a cost that has to be borne by 80 people, it
Oh,
becomes
sure.
completely cost prohibitive.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
not
I
gonna
think,
work.
In all fairness, I thought his presentation was excellent.
Yeah.
I just we'll see what the outcome.
Yeah,
You
we
know-
just
you know,
gotta keep.
one of the alternatives, when you really think about it, a modern septic system implemented on a per lot basis could go a long way to introducing more capacity in the downtown area. But again, that cost would be borne by the property owner.
Yeah.
You're not gonna open up a restaurant downtown and settle in with the ancient
No,
septic system.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I mean, if you look
That's
at
what's been holding it up.
what we just heard tonight, Tedler's is saying that they could do 20 to 30 people. You look at the other businesses where the church was, I think they try to bring in a coffee shop and it was 2 to 3 seats.
That's right, yeah.
Which in a
Right.
barber shop, they could only have 2 seats and they wanted 3, but they said, no, you can only have 2 seats. So it's, I mean, and you see the space that's Settlers has. Imagine what
4,000 square
other
feet.
businesses would be
Yeah.
able to bring into town. I think we would be able to get the type of businesses that people want,
I'm-
and so.
Today's individual septic systems, like Settlers tonight, 20 years ago, that wouldn't be able to happen. The septic system capacities today are much greater than they were. They're much better engineered, designed. So, you can introduce more density, but you have to have a better septic system, on-site septic system.
Sure.
You're not just,
I just don't, yeah.
you're not gonna operate something with a pipe going out the back into, a cauldron in the ground. It's just-
Yeah,
But I'm sure some of those systems still exist out there.
yeah.
Mr. Chair, one other
All
thing.
right, cool.
So,
Yeah.
with what you just said, John, as we have more and more people that are buying land, and I don't know who's going to be. I know one piece of land, that was purchased and what that's going to be used for. But as a board, as I mentioned to John, right? That's his name.
Dan.
Dan.
Yep.
No, the
Coughlin, oh, John,
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
the developer for Settlers.
Yeah, I actually want to make sure that, we kind of identify in a growth, where more businesses are coming in, what our function is. Because I'd really like to see, how we can start helping some of these businesses that are coming in to town and promoting them, helping these business owners, with what they need. Because I really see this as an opportunity for this town to really kind of let everybody around us know that, hey, we're growing, why don't you come into Georgetown, kind of the water, come in, the water's nice kind of thing. So I know other towns have come up with like advertising books of, different, you know, businesses that are in town, why they should come to Georgetown, you know,
Yeah, that's-
things like that, and you mail them out to
The
different
key-
business
the key-
owners and.
Good
The
point.
absolute-
I can talk to Kip and see if we can do something with the economic development section of the website. And just, you know, start to put the businesses that are coming in now. And just like you said, add here reasons why you would like to come into
Well,
town.
even
That's a
Carlton
good
Drive,
idea.
right, when they presented, you know, they asked, all right, you know, how do we kinda, you know, get in touch with other businesses
Yeah,
in town? And, you know, I would think that maybe that's one of the functions that, you know, we should be about, is
Yeah.
kinda trying to put businesses together and, you know, helping out, you know, in that way. Again, just thoughts,
The
you know.
absolute
Yeah, yeah.
keys are that you, as the Board of Selectmen, right, recognize the constraints that are put upon a community when you do not have the financial resources to pay for your schools, your police and fire. Okay, you realize that, and you want to grow the tax base of the community to try to
Right.
grow your way into being able to sufficiently provide for those basic services that a community wants to provide for, you know, a great school system, police and fire for safety, emergency services. You want to be able to afford the best that you can afford. The Board of Selectmen supporting economic development growth, sound economic development growth, is absolutely key. And you have to have the staff in place that's also on board with, you know, putting the red carpet out, doing everything you can to help facilitate. And today, I'll just give you an example. I mean, these people are desperate to get in the queue of the permitting process. They don't really come close at this point of meeting, you know, your regular deadline schedule of trying to get them in the queue in a timeframe that they want. You know, but you can, if you are creative enough and you want to work hard enough and get the public hearing notice done and get the abutters notices out there and get it ready, get the package, the plan, the application ready for the public hearing process. So it's Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, everybody on board as part of a team, and staff, ultimately important. You know, hard-working staff that wants to produce what the town wants. And this town desperately wants, I believe, economic development
Sure.
to grow our tax base so that we have the financial resources necessary to produce the services that people want.
Sure,
You
absolutely.
know, and you want to maintain the quality of life. You know, people don't want, you know, the town blown out and,
Right.
you know, ruin what you have. It's all, you know, it's planned
Smart
for,
growth,
it's,
yeah, yeah.
it's smart growth.
Yep.
And, you know, that's what it's all about. But, you know, brochures out there, yeah, great, but it's the people, you know, it's yourself. Everybody here, you know, working with people, networking with people. Hey, you know, look at the people that we had in here at the last meeting.
Yeah,
They looked far and wide
yeah, yeah.
for a place, and they settled in Georgetown, you know, and, you know, my attitude is that, hey, whatever we can do for you, just call up, you know, we're here
But
to
see,
help
that's what
you.
I mean, John. You're saying call up. I'm saying that we should be a little bit more proactive. Carlton Drive, right? Cambridgeport, right? They have 60 employees. How do we help our businesses in Georgetown maybe tap into some of those employees to sell
Yeah.
their
Now,
products and services?
the number one thing to recognize, beyond anything else, is that we're in a strong economy. This economy is growing our local economy. If we were in a recession period, these people wouldn't be looking for places to expand or to, you know, start their businesses. They wouldn't. You know, so the whole idea is to grab, every community should be grabbing as much economic development potential that's being provided by this strong economy as it can, because that will help you get through the bad times that always do show up when they show up. And, you know, people, Board of Selectmen want people like me to be rainmakers. When the economy is not producing jobs, it's hard to produce them. But the economy is producing jobs at this point in time, and it's creating a real demand. Literally, the phone's ringing off the hook because we're in a hot economy. Everybody is looking for an opportunity to set up shop, expand their operation. There's people waiting right now for
Yeah.
this National Ave property. There's multiple parties, you know. They wanna be on
Don't sell
exit.
yourself short,
They wanna
John.
be exit
You,
54.
you've done a great job,
But they want-
since you come in, so don't sell yourself short.
These people wanna be at exit 54. Remember when we started all this a
Because it's,
couple of
I
years
think,
ago?
because it's undeveloped, right? Right now.
It's the most underdeveloped potential development intersection on 95. It's just right there.
To Joe's,
There's Rowley too, and all the way into Ipswich.
Yeah, Rowley as well, yeah.
to Joe's point about promoting the new companies that come in, we also need to be promoting the companies that are already here.
No, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
yeah.
Wouldn't it have been nice to somehow get Pomodori's or any of Village or any of them to, get over to, Carlton Drive to that new business? And hey, if you guys are having lunch, just come down to Pomodori's, right? Or Village or whatever, right? And then, hey, go over to, another business. And, again, I just thought that is really, talking about economic development, and what Wayne just said is, yeah, not only the new businesses, but yeah, we also have existing businesses that we want to see do well,
Right.
right? And really excel. So how do we do that? How do we
Yeah.
help them?
Yeah, no,
Do
I
you
agree.
think that one of the things that the Board of Selectmen can do is to make it very clear to everybody in the land use process how important economic development is?
And the thing to realize too is that there's just so much, that can be developed. You saw the maps.
Oh, right, right.
A lot
But
of
I
wet.
mean-
There's a lot of wet out there.
There are
Build on
impediments.
wet, so
Right.
it's not we're creating a metropolis.
No,
We're-
no.
All we're trying to do is provide for the enough economic growth that's not gonna disturb people's quality of life, but produce a little bit more revenue so that we can take care of our school bills, our police and fire, DPW, that we can have a sustainable community. That's really what it's all about. We're not looking for a gold mine, we're just looking for enough money so that, we can make it through the winter without having to worry with more snow than we predicted.
And also because the point that Tom Barabee, the assessor, said, there's only so much.
Right,
Yeah.
Right.
It's only gonna get so big.
right.
That's it.
And this is,
all gone.
this presentation tonight's a reality check.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
5 acres.
An engineered reality
Still.
check is important.
Yeah, yeah.
The information that
Right.
we're going to actually have in hand from this study
Yeah.
is gonna go a long way.
But I think it's great because
think I wanna
it puts to
expand the
bed all the
mean,
the
still.
speculation and
We
the
might
history of what we've done and is it feasible or not?
Yeah, and
And
the
you got all the
fictitious-
facts now and you can present it to the town and let the town decide what
Yeah.
what direction they
There's
want to
nothing
go.
worse than having to chase your tail.
Right, sure. I agree.
You're always better off finding out what the facts are and
Yeah.
what can actually be implemented.
I still think that the pace of
Past
the
my bedtime.
approval process
You got
has
something?
more to do than anything right now, don't you think?
Yeah,
There's,
absolutely.
there's a lot of interest, and unless we can get the pace of approvals going faster than they normally do, it's not gonna happen.
You gotta work hard at it. A lot of people don't know how to arrive at, an approval.
Yeah, yes. How to close.
Making a decision for a lot of people is a very difficult thing to do because it has consequences. Somebody might kick you in the.
But I mean, that's
in the
why they're
butt
there.
For making a decision. Some people, if it's a great decision, he has
Yeah.
plenty of friends. If it's a bad one,
I don't know about that.
everybody's running for the door.
What, I want.
Still,
My wife said all that
That's
about
everything
me.
else? Or
oh no, we're
I'm
just
good.
talking.
motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good night, everybody.